And now, your daily dose of debate, breaking news, and uncensored views. This is the Michael Medved Show.
And another great day in this greatest nation on God's green earth, and maybe really a great day where there is actual progress in ending the Iran-U.S. war. How will that progress come about? Will it be because of total surrender, unconditional surrender by the Iranians? No. It would come through some kind of negotiation. So what is the deal that is on the table? By the way, Iran says there is no deal. They say they don't want to talk to the United States, but President Trump does. We will get to that. We will also get to the question of having ICE agents monitoring our airports. And is that in order to apprehend and to deport illegal immigrants? Or is it to help the fact that the Congress of the United States is unable to get things together enough to pay TSA agents who have been working without pay and literally thousands of them resigning with dysfunctional airports and very long lines that are holding up the country as it moves toward spring break. What's going to happen? Well, one thing that's happening is that stocks have rallied today, the beginning of this week, because President Trump said the U.S. and Iran have held talks, even though Iran says that's not true. Meanwhile, there has been a horrifying terrorist attack on Jewish ambulances in London. Astonishing, and an example of the wave of anti-Semitism, which has been sweeping across not only Europe, but the United States of America. We'll also be speaking to Mona Charen, who has a piece taking a journey not to a place, but to a state of mind, to journey into Trump's mind and what it is that motivates him as he handles this war, and maybe, just maybe, trying to bring it to an end. And Michael Rubin, who is an expert in Iran, has lived there, has worked there, has studied there. He will talk about what is next for the Iranian people. And why is it that so many of the expectations that people had about the Iranian population, which allegedly hates its current rulers, why they didn't erupt in protest or in even revolutionary activity at the beginning of this war, as many people in the U.S. and in Israel expected that they would. We will get to that with Michael Rubin as well. And there is also a great deal of reaction, and virtually none of it good, to President Trump's unprecedented personal reaction to the death of Robert Mueller, where President Trump, as I think most of the people listening probably already know, commented immediately within an hour of Mueller's death that it was a good thing that he died, and that that should be treated gratefully and celebrated by people who follow President Trump. And many, many people who do follow President Trump and give him very strong support are not ready to support this particular reaction. Okay, the stories right now are dramatic and confusing. Confusing because they're contradictory. Axios says that President Trump told reporters that his envoys had been negotiating with a senior Iranian official, not naming who that official is, and he claimed the parties were in agreement on many points, that they are working toward a settlement of this war. Regional leaders in global markets were bracing for major escalation on Monday, but Trump walked back his threat to strike Iran's power plants, citing productive negotiations. Iran denied that any such talks had taken place. and claimed that Trump was just trying to calm the energy markets. Well, it appears to have worked because CNBC is reporting that stocks rallied this morning after President Donald Trump said the U.S. and Iran have held talks and that he was halting strikes on Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure, giving investors hope that the Middle East conflict that spiked oil prices and raised fears of a global recession was nearing an end. Everyone, regardless of what side of politics you were on, can hope that this war reaches an end before it does any more damage to the U.S. economy, let alone to the literally thousands of U.S. Men and women in uniform who are now subject to a worsening war. Speaking of a worsening war, the New York Times reported that 4 ambulances belonging to a very well-known, well-respected Jewish volunteer emergency service, which operates around the world. This was in London. The service is called Hatzolah. And that service was subject to an arson fire that was set early this morning. The police reported, adding that it was being investigated as an anti-Semitic hate crime. Prime Minister Keir Starmer called the episode a deeply shocking anti-Semitic arson attack in a post on social media. He said, the Prime Minister, anti-Semitism has no place in our society. The attack on the ambulances, which the police said in a statement belonged to the nonprofit service Hatzolah, came after a spate of recent attacks against Jews and Jewish organizations across Europe and across the United States. The police said they were called at 1:45 a.m., a local time, this morning to Golders Green. I know Golders Green. I've actually stayed in Golders Green during some of my time in London, which is a very nice, pleasant, and traditional Jewish community in a residential area in North London. And the fire department, which sent dozens of firefighters to the scene, had alerted the police and suspected this arson to destroy ambulances. Meanwhile, on the other front of battle, President Trump made a warning Saturday evening, giving Iran 48 hours from the time he made his post to allow ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, which everyone has been focused on. Tehran had declared the Strait of Hormuz closed since the U.S.-Israeli strikes began on the country on February 28th. Iran has said it would attack any ships attempting to come through, essentially stopping a fifth of the world's oil transports. If Iran doesn't fully open, this is what the president said, if Iran doesn't fully open, capital letters, without threat, the Strait of Hormuz, the president said, within 48 hours from this exact point in time, the United States of America will hit and obliterate their various power plants, starting with the biggest one first, exclamation point. That is what Trump said on Truth Social. This morning, The Hill is reporting that a senior Iranian security official said that Tehran is not in talks with President Trump, adding that Trump backed down from further attacks on energy infrastructure due to pressure from the markets and America's allies. So who's right? We will get to that and to more with Mona Charen coming up with a journey into the mind of Donald J. Trump. That and more on The Michael Medved Show. And on the Michael Medved show, what is happening with the war in the Middle East? And it is a serious war, which has already done serious damage to the economy. Everybody knows that because of the gas prices, which have had a very visible increase in the United States and the West. But The Hill this morning reported that a senior Iranian security official said this morning that Tehran is not in talks with President Trump, adding that Trump backed down from further attacks on energy infrastructure. And he did that because he received pressure to do so from the markets and from our allies. Quote, Trump backed down from attacking critical infrastructure as Iran's military threats became credible, said a senior official of the Iranian government. Financial market pressure and the threat of bonds, I think they mean a threat to bonds, within the U.S. and the West have increased. And this has been another important factor in this retreat. In other words, Iran is claiming they're winning the war. Or maybe they would like to believe they've already won the war by credibly threatening to close the Straits of Hormuz. The Fars news agency has presented these translated remarks. There's also this from CNN. Iran's Defense Council has threatened to mine the entire Persian Gulf if Iran's coasts or islands are attacked. So said state media today. The only way to pass through the Strait of Hormuz for non-belligerent countries is coordination with Iran, a statement from the high-level security body said, according to the semi-official Fars news. The warning comes after Iran's military said it would shut down the Strait of Hormuz and strike regional infrastructure if President Trump follows through on a threat to bomb its power plants unless the waterway is reopened by this evening. The Dispatch also reports, and this has been echoed by the New York Times and many other sources, as fighting between Israel and the Lebanese terrorist group Hezbollah continues. The Israel defense minister, whose name is Israel Katz, said yesterday, that Israel Defense Forces operating in southern Lebanon have been ordered to increase the demolition of bridges and houses that the Israeli government says are being used to aid Hezbollah fighters. Israeli strikes targeting crossing points over the Litani River, which runs through southern Lebanon. Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir said the IDF's chief of staff said on Saturday that the IDF's campaign against Hezbollah had only just begun, adding that Israeli forces were prepared for a long campaign to ensure security for residents of northern Israel who have been subjected to constant rocket and drone barrages from Hezbollah, which is the terrorist group in Lebanon that is financed very directly by Iran, and still draws to the point that whatever the successes of the air war for Israel and the United States, there are still capacities for Iran and its proxies, like Hezbollah, like the Houthis, perhaps, not so much from Hamas, because Hamas has taken a real beating in its fights with Israel. But generally, the Iranians still have the ability to damage America, to damage Israel, certainly, and to damage the interests of civilized life. President Trump, this is according to Mediaite, instructed immigration and customs enforcement agents helping out at American airports amid the ongoing partial government shutdown not to wear masks in a Monday Morning Truth Social post. And it's bizarre that for these customs enforcement people, the ICE people, they work for the president. They work for the government of the United States. Why would he give them orders through social media, through his Truth Social post? In a separate Truth Social post yesterday, Trump announced that he would be dispatching ICE personnel to assist the Transportation Security Administration. On Monday, he said, ICE will be going to airports to help our wonderful TSA agents who have stayed on the job despite the fact that the radical left Democrats, who are only focused on protecting hardline criminals who have entered our country illegally, are endangering the USA by holding back the money that was long ago agreed to with signed and sealed contracts and all, declared Trump. But watch, no matter how great a job ICE does, the lunatics leading the incompetent Dems will be highly critical of their work. And then in capital letters, they will do a fantastic job. The great Tom Homan is in charge. And then 3 exclamation points. So far, over 400 TSA agents working in airports have resigned, which is part of the problem here. And then there is this from CNN. As we face difficulties on every level, CNN is reporting that the DHS funding, President Trump on yesterday threatened not to support any deal to fund the Department of Homeland Security until lawmakers pass the Save America Act, which has nothing to do with Homeland Security. It has to do with voting. And President Trump is injecting a new demand into ongoing negotiations over the partial government shutdown as travel disruptions mount across the country. Trump's comments come as the Senate remains locked in a marathon debate over the federal elections overhaul bill that's a top priority for Trump, but one that faces near impossible odds in the Senate. That's because of the filibuster rule. The Senate stayed in session over the weekend to try to hammer out the details, but talks have been paused until Democrats respond to the latest offer from the White House. Coming up, Mona Charen, columnist, on entering the mind of Trump concerning the crisis and war in Iran. Coming up on the Medved Show. And it is always an honor to welcome back my friend Mona Charen to this show. Mona is a syndicated columnist. She is a policy editor at thebulwark.com and the host of the Mona Charen Show. That's Mona Charen at thebulwark.com. But before we start, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Michael Medved Official. Mona Charen, you have a new piece which has gotten quite a bit of attention about President Trump's war psychology. Now, to probe that war psychology, today there are different stories. One from the Iranian regime, the mullahs and the leadership, such as it still exists, of Iran. And then what the White House is saying. The White House is saying we're in the middle of negotiations and we have 15 points that we've already reached agreement on, and that we are going to be having a successful conclusion to this war. The Iranians say they're not negotiating at all. Who do you believe?
You know, Michael, a few weeks ago, actually, at the State of the Union, I actually wrote that this was an occasion where, for once, I thought he said something about Iran, as you recall, at the State of the Union, and the Iranians denied it. And I thought, for once, I actually think the Iranians may be telling the truth and the president may be lying. So neither of these parties has a history of honesty. And so it is really hard to tell who's telling the truth. But I would have to say, if you forced me with a gun to my head, that I would say the Iranians are probably more reliable here, just because I think it's pretty clear that we have a president who tries to invent his own reality and then sort of hope that the world cooperates. Shockingly often, the world does cooperate, but he is saying, that because he needs a way out. He blundered into this war thinking that it would be a quick win, like he achieved it with the Venezuela operation or Midnight Hammer, where he, supposedly obliterated their nuclear sites, which now he says he didn't do. But anyway, so it looks to me as if he is clearly looking for an off-ramp here. And
okay, how does that reflect the psychology that you write about in your column?
Right. So the piece I wrote last week, where I talked about how yes, it's true that he's going back on every pledge he ever made not to get us into wars, et cetera, but that for Trump in particular, he is exquisitely sensitive to humiliation. He, first of all, he likes to humiliate others, and he feels humiliation himself very acutely. And so he lived through, as did you and I, it was a long time ago, but we lived through the Iranian hostage crisis. Mm-hmm. And it was unpleasant, and the American people were very furious about the way our people were treated by the Iranian regime. And since then, Iran has done other things to alienate us and to make us angry. But for Trump, it is intolerable to be humiliated. And so you'll note that, what did he call this mission? Not, Operation Iranian Freedom or Operation, denuclearize Iran or many other possibilities that you can imagine. No, he called it Epic Fury. And I think that tells you a lot about what's in his mind, is that he is still smarting from a 40-year-old insult to his honor, as he sees it.
Peter Baker of the New York Times says that Epic Fury is the perfect name for basically summarizing the whole Trump presidency, because the key Trump presidency emotion is anger.
Yes.
It's fury.
Yes.
Angry about the economy, angry about foreign policy, angry about social issues. There's a lot of free-floating anger going around.
And anger at what he sees as his victimization at the hands of the Biden administration. They investigated him, and he was the subject of criminal charges, et cetera.
And convictions. Yes. There's all of it. So right now, in terms of ending the war, if there were the kind of deal that President Trump is saying that is currently being negotiated, first of all, he didn't say with whom he is negotiating, because it's unclear who's really running Iran right now.
Correct.
Which brings up another issue,
Mm-hmm.
which is, why was President Trump and his Israeli partners as well, why were they so falsely optimistic about an uprising by the Iranian population? Why did none of that happen, as President Trump seemed to expect at the beginning of this war?
Yeah. I think they misread what happened in January. In January, you had tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of Iranians taking to the streets all across the country to protest the regime that the population has hated for decades. And the regime responded with such ferocity It mowed people down, and it did the equivalent, maybe bigger, to what the Chinese did in Tiananmen. And the fact is, the people were successfully repressed. The demonstrations halted because tens of thousands of Iranians, estimates are up to 30,000 Iranians, were killed by their government. And it worked. The repression, the violence, the fury worked. And I think the Israelis and the Trump administration looked at those protests and thought all they need now is a little extra help from the air, and they'll come out again. But the Iranian regime went on television immediately once the war began and said any demonstrators will be shot on sight. And people knew they meant it because they had done it just 2 months previous. And I think the Israelis and the Trump administration are both at fault here for overestimating what could be done by bombing, that you could change the regime from the air.
Well, also, the fact is the demonstrators have no guns. They have no weapons.
That's correct.
Right?
They have no guns. And, and so now you find this sort of pathetic news coming out that Trump is talking to, or at least he was, at one point, the Kurds, we'll send in a few armed Kurds from the north. I'm sorry, but this is an enormous country, not majority Kurd. The idea that they would be able to do anything much in this situation is ridiculous. No, I mean, it's a really devilish problem. The regime in Iran, and I hasten to add, which I don't think I need to say to you or your listeners, is that this is one of the worst regimes on the planet, and it would be a great thing if the world could see the back of it. But just because something is desirable doesn't mean it's achievable.
And so what kind of deal do you anticipate, just in the moment left to us, Trump will make? Something that at least denies them a nuclear capacity?
Absolutely not, because they can make any promise in the world, but they've already demonstrated that they can withstand the worst the U.S. has to offer. And so they have every reason now to say whatever they need to say to make the guns stop, but then not comply, as they have not complied in the past.
Mona Charen, her piece is posted at our website at michaelmedved.com. You can also find her at Mona Charen at thebulwark.com. We will be right back. What is the heart of the current disagreement that keeps the war going, the war between the United States and our enemies in Iraq? Well, first of all, the United States says, President Trump says, there are talks to end the war that are going well. And Iran says, no talks are happening. President Trump spoke to reporters at Palm Beach International Airport, and he announced that we are going into a 5-day period, though I'm not sure what exactly that 5-day period entails. This is President Trump, clip 19.
To get together today by probably phone, because it's very hard to find a country. It's very hard for them to get out, I guess. But we'll at some point very, very soon meet. We're doing a 5-day period. We'll see how that goes. And if it goes well, we're going to end up with settling this. Otherwise, we'll just keep bombing our little hearts out.
Bombing our little hearts out. You still lose your heart, and that's usually a vital organ. At least generally it is. President Trump talked about blowing up the largest electric generating plants that cost over $10 billion to build, blowing up these plants in Iran. He said this about America's plans, clip 17.
So tomorrow morning sometime, their time, we were expected to blow up their largest electric generating plants that cost over $10 billion to build, It's a very good one. There was no dearth of money. And one shot, it's gone. It collapses. Why would they want that? So they called. I didn't call. They called. They want to make a deal. And we are very willing to make a deal. It's got to be a good deal. And it's got to be no more wars, no more nuclear weapons. They're not going to have nuclear weapons anymore. They're agreeing to that. Any of that stuff, there's no deal.
Then basically, Caitlin Collins asked a very relevant question. She pointed out that President Trump said that there were many points of agreement with Iran. So she asked the president to give us an example of some of the agreements that have already been reached. Here again is President Trump with Caitlin Collins, clip 20.
Tito, you said there's many points of agreement with Iran right now.
Many.
What, can you give us a
Many, like 15 points. 15 points.
Iran has said yes.
Well, they're not going to have a nuclear weapon. That's number one. That's number 1, 2, and 3. They will never have a nuclear weapon.
Said yes to that?
They've agreed to that.
Well, they've agreed to that, he says. And then President Trump is also optimistic about taking control of the Strait of Hormuz. Why? This is clip 13.
Will Iran still be able to control the flow of oil?
Be jointly controlled.
By who?
Maybe me. Maybe me.
You want the United States to?
Me and the Ayatollah, whoever the Ayatollah is, whoever the next Ayatollah. Look, and it'll also be a form of a very serious form of a regime change. Now, in all fairness, everybody's been killed from the regime. They're really starting off. There's automatically a regime change. But we're dealing with some people that I find to be very reasonable, very solid. The people within know who they are. They're very respected. And maybe one of them will be exactly what we're looking for.
Okay, that we will get exactly what we're looking for from the Iranians with the same regime and the son of the last Ayatollah, now the supreme leader, the son whose father and mother and wife were all killed by American or Israeli bombs. Again, President Trump is optimistic. And that maybe is a good thing. But Maria Bartiromo on Fox Business talked about her most recent conversation with President Trump. This is clip 18.
I just spoke with President Trump, and he told me that Iran wants to make a deal badly. He said that the talks have been ongoing. I said, how much longer will this conflict go on? He said the talks, I said 5 days to halt or postpone strikes on the electrical infrastructure. It could happen sooner, he said, but I have put down 5 days. I asked him what his reaction is to Iranian state television saying that there are no talks. And he said he's not sure what they are referring to because the most recent talks happened, in fact, last night with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner and their counterparts. When I asked about the Iranian TV saying that no talks have happened, he said it's hard to get any information there because of the U.S. is blowing up so much of their infrastructure.
Wait, so the reason we can't hear about these optimistic talks of a settlement is because we're still blowing up so much of their infrastructure? Lindsey Graham on Fox News Sunday said yesterday that we have the best chance in 2,000 years against the Iranians. Okay, this is clip 10. Lindsey Graham, the senator
for
from
Iran.
South
What's the
Carolina.
new leadership going to be?
I don't know. We don't need to really worry about negotiating with Iran. We need to keep them in a box. What are you going to negotiate Iran with? What I want to do is contain them, take their missile program and keep it blown up. Make sure they can never sprint out to a nuke. Make sure they have no money to support terrorism. Control the island and let them die on a vine, and hopefully the people will rise up. What I'm looking for is defanging Iran so we can move to peace. The
Okay.
Iranian people one day will have ability to take their country back. But we have the best chance in 2,000 years when Iran is neutralized for Saudi and Israel to recognize each other in the Arab-Israeli conflict. That is my goal. That is President Trump's goal. 2026 could be the biggest year since 1945 if we neutralize Iran. Don't let them do it again.
Well, okay, that's something that
Okay, yeah, that is something that would be a very positive development. There's also this bulletin from the Washington Post. President Trump on Friday night, a couple of days ago, announced that the United States had bombed Karg Island, targeting Iran's most critical oil terminal in an attack that Tehran has warned would escalate the conflict. Now, this is not something that happened last week. It happened Friday night. It's located about 15 miles from the Iranian mainland in the Persian Gulf. Last night, U.S. forces executed a large-scale precision strike over Karg Island, Iran, read a statement posted early Saturday to X by U.S. Central Command. The strike destroyed naval mine storage facilities, missile storage bunkers, and multiple other military sites. U.S. forces successfully struck more than 90 Iranian military targets on Karg Island while preserving the oil infrastructure. A U.S. official speaking on the condition of anonymity because of the sensitivity of the issue said that U.S. forces struck after seeing indications that Iran might soon reinforce the island with renewed defenses. The strikes, the official said, were designed to eliminate that possibility and maybe bring about that possibility that President Trump spoke about, where he will enjoy joint control of the Straits of Hormuz with some new Ayatollah. That would be quite a development, and certainly one that would help to bring the war closer to an end. So how is it most likely to end? We'll be speaking to Michael Rubin, who has been to Iran, spent a huge amount of time in Iran as a scholar of their situation. How is the war most likely to come to a successful, God willing, conclusion? Michael Rubin will be joining us, and maybe there is reasons for the new, not a wave, but ripple of optimism in this greatest nation on God's green earth.